Hello and welcome to Big Picture. I am Vishal Dahiya and today we will talk about the mounting global pressure on Pakistan on the issue of terror. After the dastardly terror attack in Pulwama carried out by Pakistan-based Jaish-e-Mohammed last week, India has started a diplomatic campaign against Pakistan to isolate it on the global stage, and the efforts are bearing positive results. While close to 50 nations have issued strong statements condemning the ghastly terror attack, some, including Israel, have offered all kinds of help to India in dealing with the menace of terror. For more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of guests today. Let me start by introducing them to you, beginning with Mr. Prabhu Dayal, who is with us here. We also have Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Professor and Dean of Jindal School of International Studies, and Smita Sharma, the Deputy Editor of the Tribune, somebody who has kept a close watch on the developments on the diplomatic aspect of it. To Chaulia, in your perspective, the way we have upped the ante diplomatically against Pakistan and the kind of results it has delivered, how do we go ahead and sustain those results? The way, Mr. Dayal is pointing out, few more strong steps need to be taken as well.
Yeah, I think Vishal, we have to also, emphasize on the narrative that we are putting out. You see, to be able to corner a country, isolate or marginalize, it requires a kind of a very sustained information campaign on a global scale. And beyond embassies and high commissions and high authorities, we need to invest a lot in, pushing out a message showing the true colors of this rogue state. And I think that requires, a far bigger effort in terms of propaganda. See, what has happened is, if you look at many countries, they still look at what happened in Pulwama and other such incidents as part of some kind of a, dispute that these two countries have about Kashmir. But we are now saying that it's gone far beyond that, and what is the real problem is a kind of a military machine that is using proxies as part of its, and creating a kind of a environment that is inimical to human rights and to human dignity. And if we take that further, see, the only successful case where a country was actually isolated through a global campaign was the apartheid regime in South Africa. So if you look at that, it took 20 years finally for the pressure to yield results and finally for the regime to change there. So apartheid, remember, was about abusive minority that was in control of a state and where the majority black people were suppressed as second-class citizens. So that had a certain appeal in the international community where people said, oh my God, here are 10% of the society ruling over the remaining 90% in a highly brutal and oppressive manner. Okay. So I think we have to also look at what Pakistan is doing internally to its own people, to its minorities, and to the civilians in general. Because until we bring the narrative to that level, if we keep saying that it is a sponsor of terrorism in Iran, in Afghanistan, in India, people still see, okay, maybe they have some disputes. See, so we should not assume as Indians, as victims, we think that everybody understands. But everybody still doesn't understand. And everybody still frames this as some kind of a bilateral dispute that these countries have, and this violence is happening as a result of it. So to change it to another track, and for people to, news media, for public opinion, and of course government elites around the world, for investors around the world to believe that this is a completely different scenario where we have a kind of a pariah regime that must be completely distanced. We need to look at what they're doing in Balochistan, what they're doing in the Khyber to the Pashtuns. We need to be talking about, the general suppression of the civilians under a military yoke. And we have to bring these things out, because until people see this as a regime that is harming its own people, as its own citizens, as in Pakistanis, as well as its neighbors, we need that comprehensive messaging. Otherwise, I'm afraid that no matter how much we lobby or not, the old mentality is to see that maybe these, look at the UN Secretary General.
We'll have to change the narrative.
Vishal, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he has advised both India and Pakistan to exercise maximum restraint. This is the same old formula, right? Who should exercise restraint? We are the victims and they are telling us we should exercise restraint. So they are understanding it in a different frame, and we have to change that frame, and that is the challenge.
Okay, two significant aspects here, and events have also taken place just around that dastardly attack, terror attack in Pulwama. One, the attack on Revolutionary Guards in Iran. The other, in Afghanistan, the way things keep on happening. And both countries, at the same time, have accused Pakistan of perpetrating those terror attacks or supporting those terror elements. So should we go ahead and, also bring forth their aspect and also sort of strike some sort of arrangement with them, and also try and corner Pakistan regionally, because as Smita was pointing out, in the region also we will have to look what is happening in our backyard. Dr. Chaulia?
Vishal, I think, see, we have to also study the Pakistani economy and its external benefactors more closely. So, of course, China and Saudi are the main, the ones who have been bailing them out repeatedly, and we've mentioned that. But you look at the trade profile of that country, you look at the tax base of that country, you look at the stock exchange of the country, which are the foreign capitals with which they are connected. If you do a detailed, field study of Pakistan's vulnerabilities in the economic sphere, you will find, for example, that countries like Malaysia or Japan, Kuwait, UAE, these have also been major trading partners. So we should be engaging with many of these on one-on-one basis and looking to see how we could potentially coordinate to put a squeeze on the Pakistani exports. And frankly, these are all bilateral initiatives that we have to take up. So I would suggest a kind of a field mapping of Pakistan as an entity, and not just the geopolitical, Iran, Afghanistan obviously makes sense in geographical terms, but think about it in terms of its survival as a state. It is living hand-to-mouth existence repeatedly, seeking bailout, seeking loans, kicking the can down the road, does not have a, even a tax base to collect. So how do we, and then they have a lot of overseas, funds where people are channeling, like our Hawala, but they have got even worse things. So in Dubai and elsewhere. So we need to tap into those and look at how we could strangulate them through these processes. So I think we have to really look at, it's like if you see the Chanakya Niti, my neighbor's neighbor is my ally, that kind of thing does happen, and that model fits in this case with Iran and Afghanistan. But we have to go beyond it, and we are in the era of the so-called, globalization, or we are reaching a kind of a crisis in globalization, but still, Pakistan is embedded in these global networks, and we need to try and snap some of these, and then you will see the results.
Final word from Dr. Chaulia before we call it.
Vishal, if we do more surgical strikes, covert operations, other actions, punitive measures, most of the international community is going to be with us. We must take hope in that. So while we may not be ready for comprehensive isolation of Pakistan right now, the fact is when we take retaliatory measures, it is fully justified. No state objected when we did this in 2016 also, remember that. So the diplomatic ground for at least limited measures that will at least raise the cost of terrorism to Pakistan are already, justified fully by the international community. Nobody, not even China, said a word when we did surgical strikes or, express any objections. So in that sense, we already have ground for limited action. But of course, that is not the solution. This has to be sustained, as our colleagues are saying. This has to be a long struggle to try and, corner this rogue regime.
They've all agreed to India's right to self-defense. Even the Russians and the Americans.
So that we have.
So
at least
strategically,
we can take heart from that.
You need to
well,
carry
yes,
forward
definitely.
with it.
And clearly, as our panelists are pointing out, and the way it has come out clearly is that India's diplomatic efforts are bearing positive results, but we will have to be patient and keep on making those sustained efforts to put pressure on Pakistan, as well as take punitive measures to try and corner Pakistan on the issue of terror. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.